Hey everyone, Jason Franks with Games for Gaijin, back for this week's video, and I'm finally reviewing a game that a lot of people have been messaging me about, and that's Hell Village, the pseudo-sequel to Demon Worker, I guess you would call it. The mechanic is a little different, but still similar. The theme is very much in the same universe, as you can probably tell from the box art. And the game is interesting. I think this is going to be my first less than rosy review, as I have quite a few complaints about Hell Village. But let's open up the box, take a look. I'll explain the rules and see what you think. Okay, so there is a lot going on here, as you can see. Hell Village is quite a bit more complicated than Demon Worker, so I will try to keep this as concise as possible. Yet again, we have an English rulebook, which unfortunately is part of the problem. This rulebook is very confusing. I know I criticized From Batavia for having a confusing rulebook, but mechanics aren't explained, icons aren't mentioned, cards are not discussed in depth. It definitely assumes some prior knowledge of Demon Worker in order to play it, and yet some of the most critical and crucial parts of the gameplay are not even mentioned in this rulebook. So definitely a thumbs down for me on the English rules. I don't know if the Japanese rules are any better, as I haven't utilized them much. But let's just go over the game flow. So the game is divided into rounds. There are going to be 7 rounds in the game, and in each round there are going to be 6 phases. So the 6 phases, according to the rulebook, are the roll the dice phase, the income phase, the dice placement phase, the workplace management phase, the payment phase, and the end of round phase. So we're just going to go through one game round to kind of explain how this works. So Demon Worker is a dice placement game. It's worker placement, but there's some competition. So as you can see on the board, we have a lot of the same workspaces as Demon Worker. You can get sacrifice, magical weapons, and food. The Fairy Mine Mountain Range has changed to just a wild resource option. The War Room lets you collect a little bit of every resource. The Laboratory lets you draw cards. The Market lets you exchange cards for resources or resources for cards. The Cemetery lets you I believe, draw cards and get some points. Let me take a quick look. So the cemetery, discard the same amount of hell cards as the number rolled. The player gets evil points equal to the number of cards discarded. So this is discarding cards for points. And then the audience room here lets you play cards or get a resource of your choice. And evil worship lets you do some dice manipulation. So the way the game works, you'll notice that on here, some of these spaces indicate how many players you need to have in order to play. So the Human Realm, Weapon Factory, and Slime Farm, you just need at least 2 players in order to use these resource spaces. The Fairy Mine, War Room, and Laboratory, the Fairy Mine War Room, you need at least 3 players to play, and if you have 4 players or 5 players, you gain some extra dice spaces. I will say I played this game with 2 players, and it was horrible. With 5 players, it was much better, but still suffered from some issues. So more players, the better on this one. So let's just walk through an example dice placement. I'll play the green and purple player. So green, I get 2, 3, and 2. And then as purple, I get 6, 4, and 2. So essentially what happens here, the highest total roll gets to place first. And let's say with these 6, I want to go to the weapons factory. And then green with this 3, I'm going to go to the human realm, and so forth. So you place dice this way, and during the income phase, essentially what's going to happen is you're going to get as many resources or whatever effect each worker space is based on the die remaining in that spot when you satisfy the actions. So you satisfy the actions in order. We start at the human realm, we work left to right and top to bottom. So in this case, the green player would collect 3 sacrifice resources. So over here on the resource management tracker, the green player would move his sacrifice marker up to 7. And every player is going to have one of these. Likewise, the purple player, ending up with a 6 at the weapon factory, would gain 6 magical weapons and move their marker all the way up to 10. You can't have more than 10 of any of these resources. What makes Hell Village tricky is that dice can be replaced as long as your number is lower. So let's say green really needs magical weapons. Everything's lower than a 6, so the green player can swap out and bump out the purple player to steal the spot at the weapon factory. When you do that, the green player inserts his die. The purple player lowers their die by 1 value. So a 6 becomes a 5, and that die is returned to the purple player. Then let's say the purple player decides, oh, well, I really need sacrifices. They could take their 2, bump out the green drops to 2, and the green player gets the die back. So in a 5-player game, you have this real jostling for position all over the action board until the dust settles. All the numbers are much lower than they started, and everybody's finally slid into their various action spaces. So I did a quick review of those. You have resources in the first 5, you have cards on the laboratory, you have exchange at the market, you have discard for points at the cemetery, playing cards, and then dice manipulation. So on the subject of dice manipulation, this is a great example of where the rule book is extremely unclear. To read you the exact rules for evil worship, it says you can put as many dice as you want on this square. When you place a die on this square, you can change the number of 1 die to any number. It doesn't matter if you use the die returned to you by other players. Then the player who put a die on evil worship will automatically receive 1 resource and 1 evil point. So the second 2/3 of this action is very clear. No matter what number I put on evil worship, I get 1 resource, 1 evil point, and I get to manipulate 1 die. But what's not clear is which dice you can manipulate. Could the purple player manipulate the green player's die that's already been slotted to a 1? Or could the purple player manipulate their own die that's already been slotted to bump it up to a 6? So going last, evil worship would have a lot of power because you could dramatically improve the results of a die you've already slotted onto an action. It also doesn't say if you can manipulate dice that haven't even been played yet. For example, placing the purple die here and manipulating the purple die yet to be placed to, say, a 3, like so. So it's just very unclear which dice you're allowed to manipulate using evil worship. So, all of these would be slotted in various places, and then you would resolve them. So in this case, purple would get 6 sacrifice, green would get 1 weapon, purple, because they rolled a 3, would get 1 of each resource, as denoted by the little chart here. Green can exchange up to 2 cards or resources, 4 cards or resources. So you can either discard 2 cards to get 2 resources of your choice, or you can discard pardon me, this is basically 2 of anything for 2 of anything. So 2 cards for 2 cards, 2 cards for 2 resources, 2 resources for 2 cards, or 2 resources for 2 resources. So for example, I could drop my magical weapon by 2 to increase my sacrifice and my food by 1 each. So any exchange of resources and cards is allowed at the market. Here, green player could discard 2 cards for 2 evil points, so on and so forth. The audience room functions very much like Demon Worker. If you place a die there, you get to play a card. So let's talk about the different types of cards in this game. There are 3 different types. So I'm going to show you a couple examples of those types. We'll start with the easiest type first because it's very similar to what we had in Demon Worker. We have contract cards. So contract cards, for the cost listed on the left, in this case, Ice Age costs 2 sacrifice and 5 food. I get an instant reward of 3 magical weapons. And at the end of the game, this card will score me 6 evil points. So they're just miniature versions of the contracts from Demon Worker. You pay a price, you get an instant resource reward, and an end of game evil point bonus. All right, so those are the contracts. Then we have our demons. Most of the demons make a return in Hell Village. So again, for a resource cost, the old dragon costs 3 weapons and 4 food, gives me 5 evil points at the end of the game, and a permanent action during phase 3 of each round. So it tells me which phase I can use its ability. It's in the dice placement phase. And what it says is that if I place my die on the laboratory, I can modify that die by plus or minus 1 when I place it. And if you have no idea what the symbology is telling you, thankfully they have included the handy dandy demon reference again, where you can look up your demon card and figure out what ability that card is giving you. But the old dragon in this case, during the dice placement phase, allows me to manipulate a die I've placed on the laboratory by plus or minus 1. And at the end of the game will give me 5 evil points. All right, the last type of card, and this is where Hell Village, I guess, gets its namesake, are the village cards. So you'll notice this little card over here, the starting place. This is the start of the Hell Village. When you play a village card, you need to connect one of the linking spots to an already existing village card. So you'll notice that the ominous statue can be linked at the top, the bottom, or the right side of this card. I can't place it where the left side is touching because there's no linking spot. All right. So essentially the way these work is when you place a card, let's say green places the ominous statue, they would mark it as their building. It once again gives you evil points at the end of the game, 4 in this case. It also gives you a one-time bonus when you play it based on the symbols marked on the village card. So in this case, this ominous statue would give me 1 card, a little hand on the card symbol. So I would be able to draw 1 card. Now the way these village cards work, let me find a good comparison. I need something particular to explain what I'm trying to do. I didn't find it there. Let's see if I can find what I'm looking for on another card. I am striking out over and over. Okay, here we go. Perfect. All right. So let's say the purple player wants to play the former Devil's Castle, right? So they have a couple options to play here because the former Devil's Castle has linkages on all 4 sides of the card. So I have a lot of places I can put it. But let's say that I choose to put it right here. Okay. Now you'll notice that the one-time bonus at the linking spot is a match. When that happens, both cards generate the bonus. So the former Devil's Castle gives the purple player 2 evil points, and the ominous statue gives, in this case, the green player 2 evil points as well. So playing village cards, you're really trying to maximize the bonuses by playing off of your own cards and minimizing the bonuses you give to other players by connecting to their cards. In the event that you play a village card that does not have a matching symbol, so let's find an example of that. So the office card here, let's say that the purple player plays the office card like so. The draw 1 card symbol at the bottom of the office does not match the ominous statue's 2 evil points. And so neither player, purple nor green, collect a bonus for placing that village card. They still get the end of game points from the village card itself, but no one-time bonus. So 3 types of cards. You have contract cards, you have demon cards, and you have village cards. The way you play cards, which is definitely not explained in the rule book at all, is when you place dice in the audience room, you'll notice on every card there are some dice symbols on the left-hand side. In the case of the former Devil's Castle, we see a 1 and a 2. In the case of Medusa, we see a 1 and a 5. In the case of a contract, we see a 1, 3, and 6. In order to play a card, the die or dice that you have in the audience room, at least one of them has to have a number corresponding to the card that you want to play. So in this case, green having a number 2 could not play any of these, they couldn't play the Medusa card, and they couldn't play the Force of Numbers card, but the former Devil's Castle, because it has a 2 as part of the cost, the green player would be able to play this card. So as long as the green player has a 1 or 2 in the audience room and has at least 3 sacrifice, 4 weapons, and 4 food to spend from their resource board, they can add the former Devil's Castle to the Hell Village. So evil worship could potentially be extremely devastating if you're able to manipulate already placed dice, because you can totally screw up one of your opponent's plans for the turn by altering a die they have in the audience room and preventing them from playing any cards in their hand. So I really don't know if that's intended or not in terms of the evil worship action ability. We played it as you could modify dice already on the board, and it made for some devastating effects, but it seemed balanced for the most part. So that's how you play cards. You have a dice requirement and a resource cost for all 3 types of cards. One thing you'll notice is that every card can be played by a 1 die. And that makes sense because 1s yield the worst return on investment for all the other action spaces: fewest resources, fewest trades, fewest discards for points, fewest cards drawn. But a 1 will always let you play a card from your hand. The Hell Village cards, the contract cards, and the demon cards all have 1s on them. So that's the dice rolling. Income gathering is based on the bottom part of your resource card. You can get cards drawn and bonus resources by playing Hell Village cards. They can increase these 2 trackers here. You then compete with your opponents to place your dice, bump each other's dice, modify each other's dice values. You then resolve every action space in numerical order, so top to bottom, left to right. And that brings us finally to the payment phase. So at the end of every round, you're going to reveal a payment card, and every player is going to have to pay that cost. So assassin from the human realm, every player is going to have to drop their sacrifice by 3. Now, I think I forgot to mention this. The payment cards are revealed at the start of the round. So everybody knows heading into the round that at the end of that particular round, everybody needs to pay 3 sacrifice. For every sacrifice you can't pay, you lose 2 evil points. So at the end of round 1, we would flip over the card for round 2 so that everybody knew the payment coming at the end of round 2. And we see that every player at the end of round 2, because of drought, is going to have to pay 3 food. And for every food you can't pay, minus 2 evil points. So your payment cards are your round trackers. I'd have to go back and look at the rules, but I'm pretty sure the game is only 6 rounds, despite the confusing round 7 marker here, because on round 6, you reveal both of the final payment cards. So on the final round of the game, you actually have 2 payment cards that you need to resolve and up to 2 sets of evil point penalties. Once you reach the end of the game, they have a nice little legend down here for you. You're going to add up the evil points that you've accrued from actions, demons, Hell Village cards over the course of the game, plus evil points earned from the cards themselves, plus, and we haven't talked about this yet, every player is going to start the game with 1 unique knowledge card. These knowledge cards provide you an opportunity to earn 1 final endgame bonus based on the cards you've played throughout the game. So for example, philosophy, for every card with a resource cost of 7 or more that you have played, you score 3 evil points up to a maximum of 21. Food science, for every card you've played that had a food resource component to the cost, you score 3 evil points up to a maximum of 21. Here, for every demon and Hell Village card you've played, you score 9 evil points. Or pardon me, this one, let's see, we can refer to our reference. At the end of the game, for each set of 1 demon card and 1 property card, earn 9 evil points. So if you play 2 demon cards and 2 village cards, that's 2 sets, you would score 18 evil points at the end of the game. The 18 maximum is correct on the knowledge card reference sheet that is distributed to each player, but this brings us into one of my huge complaints about Hell Village. There are typos all over the place. So this card right here says up to a maximum of 20 points, but you earn points in increments of 9. So this card is nonsensical based on the mechanics they've created. Additionally, let's look at the evil point tracker down here. 0 points, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So far, so good. 6, 7, 8, 10. Whoops. Looks like they meant to put the tens digits on this side with the 0. In my opinion, even though all the cards, all the art, all the components are absolute top-notch quality, stuff like that is just inexcusable in a game of this caliber. There's typos on the cards, there's typos in the instruction booklet, there are omissions in the instruction booklet, the board has extremely confusing typos on it. To me, it just turned me off of wanting to play this game in the midst of trying to get a hold on these very convoluted mechanics, because you have dice placement, you have dice bumping, you have dice modification, you have actions, you have 3 different types of cards. No, wait, you actually have 4 types of cards because of the knowledge cards. No, wait, there are actually 5 types of cards because of the payment cards. You have resource tracking. You have 2 different reference sheets that you have to look at. All of this is so much to keep track of. For there to be typos and a confusing rulebook on top of it, this game is not friendly to first-time players. You definitely need someone experienced with the game, and you definitely need someone who can answer the multitude of questions you will inevitably have your first time through. But it's a deep game. It's a strategic game. It has a real amalgam of mechanics that almost work. And if you liked the art style in Demon Worker, clearly Hell Village is a sight to behold, because every card and component in this game is just bursting with flavor, panache, and style. And for that, I definitely give Shogo Kuroda, Group SNE, and Mosaic props, because it is still just an amazing game to look at and touch and play with. But there are a lot of problems. I didn't go into every single nuance of the rules, but hopefully you have a good idea of how this game plays now. All right, so that's Hell Village. This is another big release from Shogo Kuroda, again published by Mosaic and Group SNE. I can't tell you don't buy Hell Village, especially if you like dice drafting and you want a fun 5-player game that has some weight, some complexity, and definitely takes a couple hours to play. But in my opinion, if you're only going to buy one game between this and Demon Worker, it's not even a question for me. Demon Worker, hands down. I like Hell Village, but I love Demon Worker, and there are some real problems with Hell Village that I think should have been cleaned up prior to release. But don't let that stop you from trying it. This is a really interesting game, and in my opinion, just shows that there's so much potential coming out of the Japanese board gaming market, especially for heavier games like Hell Village. I'll see you next time. Make sure to share Games for Gaijin, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let's keep talking about board games from Japan and all across Asia.